2010, former Air Force pilot Forrest Fenn decided he wanted to get people off of their couches and out into nature. So he did what any art historian / antique dealer would do. He buried treasure in the Rocky Mountains and shared a poem online filled with clues. If you could figure out the clues in the poem and find the treasure chest, that treasure would be yours. For 10 years, it was estimated that 350,000 people had attempted to find Fenn's treasures, with many a call for rescue and at least 2 tragic deaths. Finally, a decade after the start of the treasure hunt, a man found the chest in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado. Inside was almost $2 million worth of gold nuggets, coins, gems, and historic artifacts. The treasure hunter, who wished to remain anonymous, texted Fenn a photo of the find, and Fenn confirmed that he had in fact found the treasure. If you, like the 349,999 others to search for Fenn's treasure chest, are a little disappointed, then we have 4 hidden treasures that you can still search for today, here on Fact Bites. But before you break out those metal detectors, remember to give us a like and subscribe, and hit that notification icon so you know every time Fact Bites drops a new episode. Treasure hunting is a time-honored tradition, and by that I mean it's full of scoundrels, pirates, and thieves. Just take a look at the burial sites of ancient Egypt. The Egyptians buried their pharaohs with all the treasure they need in the afterlife, from gold chariots to gold coffins. It was a lot of gold, and diamonds and lapis lazuli and any other precious items you can think of. Naturally, you'd have people who'd want to risk alleged curses by breaking in and grabbing what they could. In addition to curses, they'd also be risking their lives over elaborate booby traps. Even in ancient days, the Egyptians knew that buried treasure was way too tempting. In fact, the most intact tomb in the Valley of the Kings, that's the site of Egypt's most prominent landmarks, was the tomb of Tutankhamun. Tutankhamun's tomb was found in 1922. It was smaller and less grand than many of the other pharaohs in the valley, probably because he was only 19 when he died. He didn't have the time to amass as much wealth as other pharaohs, and it is thought that his death was sudden, hence a more rushed burial. The important thing about Tutankhamun's tomb is this. When his tomb was found in the 20s, it was the least affected by grave robbers, and it had still been broken into. Twice. Before it was even old. It's worth noting that in today's archaeological world, a lot more care is taken to preserve the history of artifacts that are found and to make sure that they remain with their country of origin. Britain, you know what you did. So if you do find buried treasure, be cool about it and make sure you contact your local museum. Indiana Jones would be proud. But where can you find buried treasure? Well, if you live in Europe, you could find treasure everywhere. Some of the biggest hoards ever found were located in farmers' fields, on banks of rivers, even in construction sites. In America, it's a little harder to locate ancient caches of gold, but according to legend, you can find buried treasure in them hills. Or in the ocean. Let's dig into it. First up, the Lost Dutchman Mine. The Lost Dutchman Mine is so mired in legend that it may or may not actually exist. The exact location of the mine is disputed, no one knows who the Dutchman in question is, and nobody knows the exact value of the mine. The most accepted version of the legend is this. A German immigrant named Jacob Waltz located a mine in the Superstition Mountains in Arizona sometime in the 1860s. At that time in history, Germany wasn't really a country yet, so everyone of German heritage was referred to as a Dutchman. Side note, I did not know we had a mountain range named Superstition, and I am very excited about it. According to some records, there was a man named Jacob Walter who sold about $250,000 in gold to the U.S. Mint in the 1880s, and many conclude that Jacob Walter and Jacob Welch may be the same person. So there could be actual evidence that this whole thing existed. In any event, Jacob Waltz eventually turned from mining to farming and owned a large homestead in 1870. That homestead was flooded in 1891, and by the end of that year, Waltz had died from an illness. In his last days, he was nursed by a woman named Julia Thomas, and the rumor is that he told her where his gold mine was located. Thomas and her family searched but never found the mine, although that didn't stop them from making a living selling maps to it for $7 a pop. And all of this may have disappeared in the Arizona sands were it not for a gentleman named Adolph Ruth. Ruth was an amateur adventurer / treasure hunter, and at 66 years old, he attempted to trek the Superstition mountain range in search of the mine. Legend has it that he was given a map that came from the Peralta family, a prominent Spanish family from the 1800s. So in the summer of 1931, Ruth packed up for a 2-week-long camping trip in the mountains to search for gold. I'm going to hit pause here for a second to say, I don't care how much gold there is, I do not want to camp in Arizona in the summer. Ruth never returned, and in December of 31, a human skull was found in the mountains with 2 bullet holes. By January, further investigation in the area found the rest of Ruth's remains, including the pins that were put in his leg after a bad break. The original map was missing, but among the remains, they also found a note written by Ruth saying he'd found the mine. Although Arizona authorities ruled that Ruth's death was due to natural causes, like a heart attack or dehydration, many in the community, including Ruth's family, believed he had been murdered for the map. To this day, the lost Dutchman mine has never been found and remains up for grabs. Of course, it is a mine, so you will have to dig out all the gold and silver yourself. Also, I don't recommend going in summer. If you like puzzles, then the Thomas Beagle cipher might be for you. In around the 1820s, Thomas Beagle and about 30 men were exploring Colorado when they found a mine of silver and gold. They mined for about 18 months, and then Beagle was entrusted with the hoard to take it back east and bury it. According to legend, Beagle did just that. He buried the treasure somewhere in Virginia, and most treasure seekers believe it was in Bedford County. Beagle then wrote down the location of the treasure, the contents of the treasure, and the names of the men set to inherit the treasure in 3 separate ciphers. He locked those ciphers in a box, gave that box to Lynchburg innkeeper Robert Morris, and gave instructions that if he, Beagle, didn't return in 10 years, to open the box and decrypt the ciphers. Beagle never returned, so Morris opened the box. Unfortunately for Morris and countless others, no one has been able to crack all 3 ciphers. Morris took them to a friend who was able to decode the second cipher. That's the one that lists the contents of the treasure. Using the Declaration of Independence as his key, this unnamed friend was able to match the numbers in the cipher to words in the Declaration and read the document. This type of cryptogram is called a book cipher. Has anyone told Nick Cage about this one? I feel like he'd be interested. According to the cipher, quote, the first deposit consisted of 1,014 pounds of gold and 3,812 pounds of silver, deposited November 1819. The second was made December 1821 and consisted of 1,907 pounds of gold and 1,288 of silver. Also jewels, obtained in St. Louis in exchange to save transportation and valued at $13,000. If this cryptogram is correct, then that means there are 3 tons of treasure, valuing almost $60 million in today's market. But this unnamed friend couldn't crack the other 2 documents, most importantly the one that has directions to the treasure's location. He in turn published all 3 ciphers in the 1880s, and for the next 140 years, people are still trying to crack it. Anybody check the Federalist Papers yet? Maybe the Constitution? Asking for a friend. Since the 1880s, lots of people have presumed that the whole thing is a hoax. Some theories even suggest that Edgar Allan Poe wrote the pamphlet and the cryptogram, but Poe died in the 1840s, well before it was ever published. All 3 ciphers can be found online, and if you're the one to finally crack it, maybe remember that you heard it here first, with your old pal Fact Bites. And then you could, float us 1% as a consulting fee. Just a measly 1%. Next up, Blackbeards Treasure. One of the most feared pirates between Virginia and the Caribbean, Edward Teach, better known as Blackbeard, terrorized the Atlantic. He started his career, probably, as a privateer under Queen Anne during the War of Spanish Succession. In 1700, Spain's king had died, leaving no direct heirs to the throne, and the rest of Europe spent 14 years trying to figure out who'd sit on it. When the Treaty of Utrecht ended the war in 1715, those British privateers serving Her Majesty were out of jobs, so Blackbeard made a lateral career move into piracy. By 1717, he was captain of his own ship and starting a whole fleet. In November, Blackbeard's crew encountered the French slaving ship La Concorde off the coast of the island of St. Vincent. My French is terrible, and I apologize. After defeating the crew, Blackbeard renamed their ship the Queen Anne's Revenge, stole all their loot, stocked up on cannons, and then left the French crew with one of his old sloops. A good question to ask right now is, what happened to those slaves? Well, some may have joined Blackbeard, but the majority were left on an island and later recaptured by the French. Not sure what he was going for there. Over the next year, Blackbeard increased the size of his crew, the number of ships he commanded, and presumably his cargo hold. In 1718, he blockaded the port of Charlestown in South Carolina. He ransacked 9 ships trying to get in or out of the port, and also held a ship of prisoners for ransom until the governor of South Carolina sent his ship some medicine. The medicine was delivered, Blackbeard released the prisoners, and went on his way. In the spring of 1718, our story gets a little murky. What's known is that the Queen Anne's Revenge runs aground on a sandbar in the Outer Banks of North Carolina. What's not known is what happened to all the treasure that was on that ship. By this time, Blackbeard had a number of ships, and there are many who speculate that he ran the Queen Anne's Revenge aground on purpose. The ship was too large to be useful in the shallow waters of the Outer Banks, and if he had a smaller ship, that meant smaller crew and a bigger paycheck for Blackbeard. At that time, England was offering pardons to all pirates, and Blackbeard seems to have been considering retirement. He requested and was granted a pardon at any rate, but ultimately went back to piracy. In November of 1718, Blackbeard and his crew were confronted by Lieutenant Robert Maynard on the HMS Pearl of the British Royal Navy. His crew was defeated and Blackbeard himself was killed. Maynard then hung Blackbeard's decapitated head from his ship and sailed back to shore. The reason was to confirm that Blackbeard was dead so he could collect the bounty, but also, that seems very extra. All of this to say, no one knows where Blackbeard's loot ended up. With the discovery of what is presumed to be the Queen Anne's Revenge in the 1990s, Blackbeard's treasure is still in the wind. There was little evidence on the ship, nor did they find the treasure on the Adventure, the ship where Blackbeard met his ultimate demise. Speculation abounds as to its current location, and theories from the Virginian coast all the way down to St. Vincent in the Caribbean. According to Blackbeard, nobody but himself and the devil knew where it was. Chances are likely that it's somewhere along the Atlantic coast, so if you find yourself on a beach in the Carolinas, you might as well bring a metal detector, right? Number 4, the Lufthansa Heist loot. Treasure isn't always silver and gold, though. Sometimes it's cold hard cash. In 1978, the Lufthansa airline at JFK in New York City was robbed of $5.875 million. That's $23 million in 2019 money of cash and jewelry. Here's how it happened. The Lufthansa cargo building was rumored to store large amounts of cash and other valuables. This was unmarked currency that American tourists exchanged for local cash that was then returned to American banks. One of the shipping clerks for Lufthansa had major gambling debts to the mob. In exchange for clearing those debts, the clerk gave his bookie information on how to break into the cargo building. The bookie then related this information to Henry Hill, an associate of the Lucchese crime family, who then related it to Jimmy the Gent Burke. Jimmy was thought to be the mastermind behind the heist, which by all accounts went off pretty smoothly. It was December of 1978, and the perpetrators pulled off the heist without even killing anyone. However, the FBI was on their trail in a matter of days. Their first suspect was Parnell Stacks Edwards, who was responsible for disposing of the getaway van. He decided to park the van in front of his girlfriend's house, where the police discovered it 2 days later. Parnell, you had one job. Because of this lapse in judgment, the mob was after him too. Edwards was killed on December 18, and he was just the first. Next to go was the bookie, Martin Krugman. His demands for money made Burke suspicious that Krugman would soon go to the feds. He was murdered and then dismembered on January 6th of 1979. One by one, anyone who could connect Burke with the robbery was killed or never seen again. Because there were no witnesses, or at least none that would talk, Burke himself was never charged with the heist, nor was he ever charged with any of the murders. Burke was eventually sent to prison, but on charges related to the 1978-79 Boston College basketball point shaving scandal. And while he was in prison, he was convicted of another unrelated murder. He spent the rest of his life in prison and died of cancer in the Roswell Park Cancer Institute in 1996. Only a small portion of the money from Lufthansa was ever recovered. Some suspect that it was spent. At least one mobster involved has admitted that some of the cash was invested in a film project about an animated ferret, and some of it was gambled away. The rest was put in safety deposit boxes belonging to Jimmy's 2 daughters. But officially, the bulk of the hoard is still out there, somewhere between New York and New Jersey. Oh, and if this story sounds familiar, that's because it was the basis for Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas. In fact, Henry Hill, the Lucchese family associate, even consulted on the film for Scorsese. To this day, it is still one of the largest heists ever pulled on American soil. So those are just a few of the hidden treasures in the US today that you could be searching for. Some may be myth, some may be rumor, but some may be true. What do you think? Do you think there's any truth to the legends? Have you searched for any hidden treasures before? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more hidden gems from Fact Bites. Thanks for watching.